let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We have a
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that
It's actually a big piece of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am co-host Andrew Sullivan, and I am joined, as always, by the amazing Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you, sir?
I'm hanging in there, man. Got my election day hangover.
Yeah, we all do, right? We all do.
Yes.
I stayed up relatively late watching results and all that other stuff, and then eventually, I was literally falling asleep in bed. So
Yeah. About the same. I was on my couch, like, oh my god, this is gonna end.
I'm old, and so bedtime for me is like 10 o'clock normally. So it was one of those things. But it is what it is. I'm happy to see that, I am happy that maybe I will finally stop getting like 900 texts a day.
Yes.
That is what I'm most excited about, if I'm being honest. The
same.
lack of all of the emails and texts and everything else. Anyways, how's things going? Well, it's been a busy couple of weeks, I shall say, especially for you, because next week is I guess there's something going on, Jonny, next week.
Yeah. There's an event. It's pretty big out in Salt Lake City. It's called KubeCon.
Tell me more, Jonny.
Yeah. It's a super nerd conference. All the cool cats are going. But no, it's a giant conference for Kubernetes projects, partners, users, maintainers, all that, where they go and kind of collaborate. All the different, umbrella projects under the CNCF are represented, I'd say, quite well, and they usually have some awesome breakout sessions and stuff like that. It's a huge networking opportunity. And importantly, like I think really close to home for us is one of the day zero events, ArgoCon, but also OpenShift Commons.
Yeah, it's been since pre-COVID, I think, was the last time I was at a KubeCon. I've been I'm a manager now, and like I spent a decade doing the on the road thing, right? Multiple hundreds of thousands of miles, traveled each year, and hundreds of nights and all that other stuff. I'm okay not going to all of these things. So I have a couple of folks on my team are going, Alan and Valentina, so they'll be there helping out with Commons, helping out with all the other Red Hat stuff that's going on there. But Commons I want to call out in particular for a couple of reasons. So one, it is the OpenShift community event. I know that the team of folks who's been putting that together has been working just incredibly hard in order to get everything put together. Importantly, and very relevant for us, so remember last 2 or 3 episodes that we've had, we've been advertising for the OpenShift superheroes, right? So we have some news there. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find the right tab here. So with all of the fanfare and all of the excitement and all of the things that we can possibly muster, Jonny and I are very happy to announce and highlight and showcase that the stream's very own often participant, attendee, contributor, right, Mr. Arhope9, has been awarded as one of the OpenShift superheroes. So congratulations.
Yes.
A golf clap of appreciation and all of that. I was talking to Aubrey a little bit ago. Aubrey's the one who coordinates these things, and Arhope9, you will literally be receiving a cape in the mail. So much as you see here, you will be able to, I guess, romp around the office wearing a cape if you so choose.
And you should, actually. And if you let me know when, I'll wear my cape that I have from the recruiting stuff, and we can be superheroes together, partners in crime.
I forgot that they used to give out the capes for that. Yeah,
way back in the day.
So yeah, we're incredibly excited to be a part of that, and I know there was she shared some snippets of me with me from the or I guess us, Jonny, from the submissions, and like it's all lots of thanks and lots of congratulations and lots of just appreciation to not just our Hope 9, but our little community here in general of like the folks who join us both live as well as follow up with us afterwards, like it's hard for us to describe the type of influence that you all have. I'll use the what's new and what's next presentations as an example of this. 4.5 years ago, when we started the live streaming thing, nobody knew what it would really be like. And like you all, our audience, participating and seeing the interaction and all of that is what led to things like the what's new and what's next now being publicly broadcast across YouTube every time that they happen. And I know the product management team, like they pay a lot of attention to the comments and the other stuff that's happening in here. And you'll often see inside of the chat, you'll see product managers and engineers and other folks, chime in and participate, and they join us when they're able to. And was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever we did the what's new for virtualization admins, like there was multiple product managers and multiple engineers who were in the chat, like helping people and correcting the things that I was saying, which I appreciate greatly. Truly, honestly, I do appreciate greatly, right? I'm not
Same.
infallible, right? So yeah, thank you so much to our community, and it is really, really amazing to see one of the people who got started, or at least I became aware of rhope9 through this community. It's amazing to see him be recognized in this way. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely appreciate all of the contributions and stuff like that, rhope9. I think like in my write-up, or really in our write-up, like the reason why we are successful is because of it's this interaction that we have with people like rhope9 and Dwayne, and a lot of our regulars, and even the stragglers that pop in every once in a while and ask questions. But we make everybody else, we're helping everybody else get better because of your interactions and your questions, and having the ability to respond to things that you're going through and stuff like that. Because other people are also going through similar things, and it's kind of cool to have like a group where you can go in, ask a question that you might think is dumb, and get a real answer. So I mean, keep it up. We love it. I get like crazy energized from it. So
yeah, same. I know. I love the chat that we have here and all that other stuff. I also really appreciate the emails that we get, because we get to really drag in the product managers and the engineering folk. So if like, hey, so have you considered this use case, or what does this mean, or why is it saying this type of stuff? And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing this. It's too bad they don't pay us for it. No. Oh wait. You say that. I don't know if my performance review doesn't have, or my metrics don't have anything related to the stream. So I do, but I don't.
Mine either.
But I'm okay with that. I thoroughly enjoy doing this, and I would happily do it for free. Anyways, don't tell my boss.
Mine either.
All right, I will take that down. Oh, they added a replace screen sharing. Wow. Sorry, I'm mumbling to myself here about the interface changes that they added to the screen share here in Restream. So with that being said, I think the only other top of mind thing that we have is, literally just Commons. So the Commons agenda is packed full. There is a link that we have here. Let's see. I guess I'll reshare my screen. Okay. Share screen. This one. So this is the agenda for Commons. So if we come down here, there is going to be a schedule. So you see there is just a ton of stuff that's going on. So in case you don't know, Mike Barrett leads the hybrid platforms business unit here inside of Red Hat. So he's kind of the overall person responsible for all things OpenShift and OpenStack. Derek Carr is the lead architect for all things OpenShift. So you can see there's just a ton of different folks, that are ridiculously smart and connected and understand OpenShift in all the different ways. So if you're there, definitely look out for, I think those of us who've been to conferences know that it's always the hallway conversations, if you will, the side conversations where you're able to capture, walk up to somebody and introduce yourself and talk about whatever. Definitely look for those folks. It's also not to minimize any of the other folks that are here on the on the agenda, right? You can see New York University is presenting, Here we've got Deloitte. We've got, let's see, Portworx down here talking about data protection and disaster recovery. Down here, Frostbank, another customer talking about what they're doing. Swift, another customer. Like, I want to reinforce and reiterate that Commons is about the community, and so the folks who are going through and doing the selection for the submission selections, they of course they want to highlight the stuff that y'all are doing. So anytime anybody ever wants to talk about what you've been up to and how you're using OpenShift, the Commons folks are always interested.
Yeah,
Right.
it's gonna be good, and there's gonna be a pretty big announcement there too, from our side. So be on the lookout for that.
Well, now I'm curious. I'll have to.
Well, I can't
ask.
say it publicly. I don't even know if I can say it publicly, but like I know that something cool is gonna drop, and it's gonna be pretty awesome. So
Is it
during the keynote? I think is when it does.
Is it OpenShift 4.17?
It's no.
I say that tongue in cheek because I think I said this before, like a month ago. So our marketing folks decouple the release of an OpenShift, version from the announcement of the new OpenShift version.
Mhm.
So you remember OpenShift 4.17 released like October 1st or something. It was crazy early
Mhm.
In the month, or it was a month ago. But all of the PR, press releases, all of the other stuff is going out next week because KubeCon. So, it's been basically 6 weeks that OpenShift 4.17 has been out, but we've been very quiet about it. Aside from here on the stream, we've talked about it a few times,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, I honestly, I wish I was that smart to put that together. I just completely brain farted on that. But yeah, it's not OpenShift 4.17. That'd be funny if it was though.
I'm heartbroken, Johnny. Heartbroken.
I know. I should be better. I could
Alan,
be better.
so Alan, you're ahead of the game here. So that is one of the notes that we have to talk about today. So rel as a worker node is deprecated at this point. So it is not gone. You still have a few releases left. I don't remember when it was first announced as deprecated. Typically, the rule is it is a minimum of 3 releases after the initial deprecation announcement before something is removed. So I guess we can look at that. Johnny, do we just want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, let's get after it.
Okay. I'll do my normal spiel though. So this is an office hours live stream here on Red Hat live streaming, which means that Johnny and I are here to answer any questions that y'all might have. So whether it's about OpenShift or today's topic around OpenShift, which is what's new for administrators in OpenShift 4.17, or anything else that you happen to have going on, anything that's top of mind, anything you want to know about, we're happy to take those questions. We'll do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them, which there's a number of times, I'll say the vast majority of the time where one or both of us is like, well, I think the answer is this. And we'll try and give you an answer here, but at the same time, we're probably also reaching back into the experts inside of Red Hat, inside of the engineering and product management organizations to get good, solid, validated answers. Worst case scenario is the initial answer we gave is wrong, or we just don't know, in which case we'll follow up and get those answers for you. I'll also point out that if you are not watching us live, and we know a ton of people don't watch us live, so if you're not watching us live, please don't hesitate to reach out via email. Both Johnny and I have our email addresses and our little name tags here on the screen. So Sully, Sully at redhat.com, or Johnny, Jonny at redhat.com. Like we were just saying, we love to get email from y'all. Anytime you have questions and you're not, we're not live, feel free to reach out via email. We'll do our best to address those. And last but not least, there's also Slack. So if you are a member of the Kubernetes Slack community, which is slack.kubernetes.io to get the invite and launch over into their side of things, there is an OpenShift users channel on there. We're both on that one, although I admit that with our own internal Slack, I don't always keep up with the external Slacks as much as or as in a timely fashion as I would like. Email is usually the best way to get me because when y'all send me email, it doesn't get picked up by any of the internal filters. Because I have filters for like memo list and OpenShift SME and product management and like all these other things. So they all get sent into folders and they don't hit my inbox. It's when I get when Johnny sends me an email or when rhope9 sends me an email or like there's no filter that says, when coming from the internet, or outside of Red Hat, send it over to this bucket. So a little, maybe I shouldn't admit that publicly, but yeah, it means y'all get priority access to my inbox. But he says, looking at his inbox that currently has 20 unread threads and 8 unread Slack messages, and we've been streaming for 16 minutes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those days. All right. Yes, please don't hesitate to reach out if you're not listening to us live, or if you are even afterwards. If you have anything that comes to mind, don't hesitate to reach out. So Jonny, I don't know. I mean, we do have slides, but I hate slides, so I guess I can show slides if I have to. I say that. I think I lost the slides. We're just gonna roll with it.
Yeah, let's just see what happens.
Slides be damned. All right. Let's see. Looking through our notes here. Oh, actually, I do want to bring up this slide. So let me. Sorry. I'm going to do this so that way I can show the slides all in the same window, so I don't have to switch around and do all kinds of crazy things. So apologies for you all listening to me logging into things.
It's like, I'm thinking.
All right, come on, buddy. There we go.
So just while you're getting started, yeah, if you're going to be at KubeCon next week, I will be over on the day 0. I'll be at the ArgoCon booth, and then I think probably in the afternoon, maybe after lunch, I'll probably swing back over to the OpenShift Commons side. So if you're around there, come find me. I'd love to meet you, hang out for a little bit. So yeah, looking forward to hopefully catching up with a lot of people next week.
Very confused as to what's going on here. Oh, there we go. I'm trying to fill out our window here so that way, and then it resizes it anyways. So hopefully this looks good. Yeah, that's a little small. I'm going to shrink it back down.
I just made you full size or full screen.
Thank you. All right. So I have slides. We have slides. Basically, we took these from when the product management team was doing the when they did the What's New live stream. I don't know why I cannot get those words out of my mouth. So when the product management team did the What's New live stream back a month or so ago, a little over a month ago, I've taken these slides and I've cut them down just to the things that we care about here, the things that we want to talk about. Security updates in 4.17. I think we have some of those things in there, so we'll certainly cover that. Jonny, what topics are you talking about at KubeCon? I think are you part of the keynote?
I'm not. I'm really just there for technical support, and ArgoCon, I'm there for just booth duty, help out.
If I got to do keynotes, you got to do keynotes, sir.
Hey, I've gotten to where, like, if I had to get up on stage, like I have got this alter ego that all the live streams that you see it firsthand, like it's just Congressman Jonny, and I just get out there and I can do it now. Like, where I used to freaking panic before I do anything, but now I just go into this alter ego and it's all good.
Yeah. Fayez, good to have a slide deck for your old episodes. Pretty lot of useful information. Yes. How long we're episode 140 something, Jonny? Yeah. So for at least 142 episodes, before we even started live streaming, we have had discussions on how do we manage information discoverability. And honestly, we don't know. I know Jonny does a phenomenal job. I don't know if we talk about this or if I say thank you enough, Jonny, but I know you do like a ton of work in the background for things like you're the one who puts in all the chapters on the YouTube videos. You're the one who updates all the descriptions and all that other stuff and puts the links in there. And thank you very much for all of your work and all of that. I know it's done largely thanklessly and in the background. So,
Well, I appreciate it. It doesn't feel like a job, so don't worry about it.
well, good, but still not good. But anyways, um, so it's the problem with especially long form video format is how to do discovery, information discovery, right? Hey, I want to know about this particular thing, and it's 45 minutes and 17 seconds in, and it goes for 3 minutes and 12 seconds, and that's the only thing that I care about seeing. And it's hard to do that, and it's hard to find that stuff. I don't know. Internally, we could certainly consider something like having for every episode that we have, creating a slide or something like that. Might be useful when we publish the social media stuff too. Just like, here's a photo or an image that's more than just the open title, open slider. But I don't know.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to like, do you remember? You remember like a year ago? It's probably a year. Do you remember not today, but prior to today, when we were talking about like doing like YouTube shorts or maybe even like the summary videos? Like, hey, here's the 3-minute recap, like that. Maybe
Yeah.
I kind of like the slide idea because it lets you do it out of band and it doesn't take as much. There's not a lot of production to it, right? Just kind of putting all the stuff together.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not a bad
I
idea.
know we've talked about when the marketing folks, was it last year we had an intern? We had talked
Yeah.
about doing it then. She actually did a phenomenal job. We're still using the spreadsheet to coordinate ourselves that she had created. And she
Yes.
had a bunch of recommendations around things like doing exactly that, right? The short form content. We just haven't found the time to go in and actually create those. I'd love to create them. I know the Ansible folks have had some success doing YouTube shorts and TikTok stuff. So something worth considering.
Yeah, that's cool.
Uh,
I wrote that down.
yeah. Thank you. Rakesh, which streaming app? So we actually use a product called Restream. So Restream is great in that it's browser-based for us. So Red Hat is a Google organization, so we use like Google Meet and all that. So it's for all the internal folks, anybody who joins, right? You're sharing through your browser, which is great because you probably already have permissions. You don't have to worry about with like Zoom or Teams or any of the others where, Mac OS, I'm a Mac OS user. Like every update, I have to go in and reauthorize it. Well, it's already done because I share stuff in Google Meet all the time. It also is what allows us to broadcast out to multiple places at the same time. So, there's 2 YouTube channels and a Twitch channel that we stream to. So it helps us with that as well. And then, of course, all the chat gets aggregated in. So we've been using it for a few years now, and it's been successful. The team at Restream has been super helpful as well. They've, whenever we have problems, they respond. They've implemented a bunch of RFEs as a result of our team using it. So.
It's the subtle UI changes that make me grumpy, though. Like that's
Yeah, I know.
that's the only thing. That's the only thing.
Let's see. Where was I? Oh, slides. So what's new in OpenShift 4.17 for administrators? So I'm not gonna use the normal introduction slides. If you watch the live stream where they go through and they talk about the overall strategy and the platform and all this other stuff, it's great information to get from that team, from the product management team about what they're looking at and all that. But we're just going to focus on what happened with OpenShift 4.17. So first and foremost, so this one is now Kubernetes 1.30 based. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the whatever the pet name of the release is.
Ooh woo.
No, that was. I feel like I need to take that snippet out, and I'm going to set that as like the sound that your Slack makes in my.
You should make that be your ringtone.
Yeah.
That-
I was looking through this. So these are the things that the product management team pulled out as being important changes and relevant changes for customer base. So kind of the one that I wanted to poke at here is pod scheduling readiness. So pod scheduling readiness, if I copy this link and then go here. So pod scheduling readiness is effectively, and we can read through the documentation here, right? It is creating scheduling gates for a pod. So basically, I create a new pod, and if we come down here, we can say it has these scheduling gates that are present. And until these are removed, the pod won't actually be scheduled to run inside of the cluster. So I've been thinking about this, and trying to figure out like when or why would I want to use something like this? Why is this important from an application perspective or something like that? Because what you can end up with is, and you can see here, here's their test pod, right? It's scheduling gated. So you have the potential to end up in a scenario where you have just a ton of pods that are sitting there, like they've been created, they're defined in the system, but they're not actually running anywhere or even scheduled to run anywhere yet. So, sample or example use cases I can think of. So these are all things that in my mind would be, I think today, probably managed through some like third-party system or even custom automation, but it's things like, oh, I have dependencies for this particular pod where, if this is running, then also run this pod. Or if this isn't running, then also run this pod. Where I have something that can go in and basically add and remove these scheduling gates. So that way, it's only running when or scheduled to run when I want it to run. At the same time, in my head, when I think of that, like there's a bunch of other ways to solve that problem at the same time. So I don't know if that's the best case scenario. I could also see it as so somebody recently asked about, with OpenShift virtualization, let's say I have a cluster of, 10 nodes and each node is running at like 90% capacity, right? And I have a virtual machine that can't be scheduled on any one node because, maybe it needs 4 gigabytes of RAM and each node only has 2 gigabytes free or something like that. But if I take a bunch of other VMs and I reschedule them around so that I basically pack the workload more tightly, I can free up enough capacity to schedule this new VM. Well, if there's something like that, I could see how this like scheduling gate could potentially affect that. Where, if something has the intelligence to do that, I can use the gates in order to say, hey, this is ready to run, right? I'm just waiting for my resources to come available. So that I'm going to call that multi-stage or multi-step scheduling doesn't exist in Kubernetes or OpenShift today, at least not natively. I want to say that like Turbonomic, and I'm sure there's other similar things can do that, can help with that. So yeah, it was just one of those like I know that this is an important thing, but I haven't fully digested and figure out like what is the precise use case here.
Yeah. Yeah, on the surface, it kind of seems like right now, I guess you could do it through a job, right? Where you have like some kind of like script running that's, like a wait condition based off of that script or something like that,
Yeah.
like we do that a lot for like when we need like an actual sequence or a linear type deployment.
Yeah.
So maybe it's kind of the replacement for that's a little bit more native than using the batch API. I don't know. That's
Yeah. Well, and you see here, so down here, right? Once the pod has been put into this status, right? So it's been scheduled, but it's gated. There are some things that you can still change. So for example, affinity and node selectors, right? And whether or not it's a hard or a soft affinity. So okay, so hypothetically, I have an application that consists of multiple pods, and I create the first pod, and it's going into this scheduling pending status. And then I schedule the rest of them, and I'm taking input based on where they get scheduled in order to update the affinity or anti-affinity rules. But without that being like some crazy logic of like, I want you to be affined, affinity, whatever. I want you to have affinity to these resources, but not these resources type of thing. But I feel like that's almost something that you could define beforehand.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm kind of struggling with this one. And if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions on like where this makes sense or how maybe the much smarter people in core Kubernetes envision this being used, I'd be very curious to know, because I feel like it's one of those like, if I squint a little harder, if I learn a little bit more, I'll really understand the power behind this, and I'm just not smart enough to get it yet. Which, that happens a lot.
So Nate had a couple questions.
Yeah.
One is it literally a list of labels, and does it have to be 0 for it to get scheduled?
So it's not labels. If we look up here in the definition, again, I haven't tested this. It's scheduling gates that are in the pod spec. So not labels, not attributes, but scheduling gates defined on the pod. And then yes, more or less, once it gets to 0, once all of the gates are removed, then the pod moves forward with scheduling, is the way that I understand it to be. So pod is ready for scheduling. You can remove its scheduling gates entirely by reapplying a modified manifest. And it gives an example, which just removes that scheduling gates. Do we share the link to this docs? Here, I'll share the link to these docs. So yeah, like I said, if anybody has thoughts on that one, I'm very curious, but it feels like it's important. So the other one that I wanted to highlight here is this node memory swap support. So we talked about this in the stream that we did on what's new for virtualization administrators. So anybody, if you've been around Kubernetes for any amount of time, you know that like step 1 when deploying Kubernetes is turn off swap. So the rationale behind that is effectively the scheduler doesn't know when swap is being used. It just sees an amount of memory that's available. And when it goes in and says, oh, this pod needs X amount of memory, this node has Y amount of memory, X fits in Y, therefore I'm going to schedule you there. And it doesn't know that maybe some amount, 50% of the memory on that node is actually swap, and therefore it should be ignored. So node memory swap support, this is one that Red Hat has been pushing upstream in support of OpenShift virtualization and VMs on Kubernetes. So it is now beta with Kubernetes 1.30 and OpenShift 4.17. The API is beta. Note that OpenShift virtualization fully supports, is it fully supported? No, I think it's tech preview. I should know this. We can go and look. Docs.openshift.com. Oh, I shouldn't be using that one, should I? I should be using the other one.
Yes, I forgot.
I know. Here, configuring hiding. So it is GA. Yeah. So there's no tech preview delineator here for the wasp-agent for swap. So I should remember this. My brain is clearly very, very messy today. So with OpenShift and OpenShift Virtualization 4.17, swap for virtual machines is generally available, even though the API is in beta. So note that is pretty common. If you're not familiar with OpenShift, it's pretty common for Red Hat to support beta APIs within the OpenShift product. And we GA full support for those types of things. I think historically we try to avoid supporting alpha APIs, but beta we do that. Top RFEs and components. So again, these are selected by the product management team of things that they like to call out as being specific RFEs that came to fruition in this particular release. So a couple of important ones, actually all of these are kind of important, so I want to walk through them a little bit. So offline migration from SDN, so OpenShift SDN to OVN Kubernetes. So note that this is an offline migration, so it is a disruptive operation. So if you don't recall, OpenShift SDN was deprecated in OpenShift 4.15, and no new installs as of 4.15 utilize OVN or OpenShift SDN rather. So you can update to OpenShift 4.16 if you're still using OpenShift SDN, but otherwise you cannot. You can no longer use OpenShift SDN. And I want to say I don't remember the particular release. We're getting ready to have, I think it's December 1st or December 2nd is the next roadmap presentation. But OpenShift SDN is going to be removed relatively soon in the next release or two. So please be prepared for that. If you are currently using OpenShift SDN, please make plans to move to OVN Kubernetes. Before you reach OpenShift 4.17. So there we go. 4 and 5 node control plane architecture. So this is another one that we talked about during the what's new for virtualization administrators. So we've got a slide on this one later down, so I'm not going to belabor the point. At least I think we have a slide, or you can look at the previous stream. The short version here is, and if we come over here to, I don't remember where it is in the documentation. Performance and scalability. somewhere in here is like etcd, so etcd scale. Increasing the database size, is that what I want? No. Node scaling, here we go. So node scaling for etcd. So the way that this works is you deploy a standard 3-node control plane cluster. And then day 2, so after install, you scale it up to either 4 or 5 control plane nodes. So down here, the documentation for exactly how to do that exists, but the short version is this is basically for better availability, depending on whether or not you feel that is necessary. So 4 nodes, you can see we need to have at least 3 for quorum. Same thing with 5 nodes, we need at least 3 for quorum with a failure tolerance of 1 or 2. So what does this mean? So historically, we've talked about this a little bit in the context of stretch clusters, but you'll note that if I lose a site, so it's 2 sites, and I have 4 nodes, so 2 and 2, or 5 nodes, 3 and 2, I'm not really changing my availability from when I just have a standard 3-node cluster size, right? I still have it's a 50-50 chance of whether or not the site with the majority of nodes is going to fail, and therefore I've lost quorum and I have to recover another node. Or with 4 nodes, it's whichever site fails, I've lost quorum, and now I have to do some sort of recovery process. So for spanned clusters, it's less about increasing availability and more about decreasing the chance of an additional failure affecting your cluster. Right? So regardless, worst case scenario, I'm going to have 2 nodes on the surviving site, and therefore, even if something happens to another one of those nodes, I still have an opportunity to recover my cluster and get back to a safe state. Excuse me. Where I think this is particularly important is with things like bare. So one, keep in mind that this is only supported with bare metal clusters, so physical servers. But 2, where I think it's particularly interesting is if I'm using hosted control planes. Right? The cluster that is hosting the control planes is sort of a critical cluster, right? It's hosting multiple control planes for multiple other clusters. So if that one cluster were to go down, it's now impacting a large number of other resources. So adding additional 1 or 2 nodes of availability to the cluster control plane, I think is an important step towards just adding another 9 of availability there. That's, I'm going to say, relatively inexpensive comparatively. Do note that, as has always been the case, adding additional nodes to etcd is not a performance increase. It is, if anything, a performance decrease. It increases availability at the price of performance. Let's see. I'm just catching up on chat while I've been rambling. Init container for me, what's the difference between pod scheduling gates and the init containers? I don't know the answer there. I haven't completely, like I said, I haven't completely digested what they look like and why. And I'm very curious. I have on my to-do list after the stream to reach out to the product management team and see, like, hey, what's the use case here? How do we see this being used? Like, it was added into core Kubernetes, so it's not like an OpenShift specific thing. So I'm just curious how folks intend to use it or how they see it being used. Jacob, hearing some larger customers asking for 5-node architectures for HA concerns. Yes, exactly. Being able to lose 2 of those nodes, you think physical servers, I can distribute that across 5 racks, and now I can lose 2 racks, 2 top of rack switches and all that other stuff. Infrastructure failures happen. We just need to accommodate those. And I feel like having 4 and 5 nodes just makes it that much more resilient. Is there support coming for 2-node OpenShift? I want to say yes. We'll know more, like, better details on that in a month when they do the next roadmap update. But I want to say yes. Keep in mind, though, that would be similar type of scenario. So if I have 2 nodes, I'm going to need 2 nodes for quorum. So if I lose one of those nodes, I no longer have quorum. So things are going to be immutable, right? I'm not going to be able to go in and change things. Pods won't restart on the surviving side or anything like that until I regain quorum. but it will keep things up and operational, and the recovery mechanism is at least understood at that point. HCP, yep, yeah. I like to virtualize OpenShift on Proxmox home lab server, but never could finish that. So Proxmox wouldn't be officially supported, but it should work. So in case you're not familiar, let's see. So RHEL certified hypervisors. So OpenShift has kind of 2 or 3 different platforms that it supports. Is this what I want? This is not what I want. 2 or 3 different platforms that it supports. So one is like the fully supported, fully tested platforms. So those are any of the ones that you're going to find in the list over here. So if I go to installing, like all of these things down through here are going to be the fully supported platforms. Here's the list. So these are the ones that are tested with every release. There's CI processes, right? The QE, QA folks go through and do all of the things, like fully supported out of the box. Then you have some that are they are fully supported but not tested. So this is going to be things like Hyper-V. And the way that we determine if it is fully supported but not tested is if it is a RHEL certified platform. So Hyper-V is a certified hypervisor for RHEL, right? RHEL is fully supported on that platform. OpenShift just doesn't have an IPI or UPI experience on top of Hyper-V. So therefore you would use down here, there's the deploying on any platform. It would be this method in order to deploy on something like Hyper-V. And then you would still receive full support, just no platform integration. And then third is going to be things that are not tested and not supported, but probably going to work. So you can classify that as things like, I'll say single node OpenShift on VMware Workstation, right? Nobody's testing VMware Workstation, but you can reasonably expect that it can run Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and therefore you can reasonably expect that OpenShift is going to be able to deploy there. Same thing with Proxmox, right? Proxmox is it KVM or is it Zen? I don't remember.
I think it's KVM.
Yeah, so I mean, we can reasonably expect that RHEL is going to run there, and therefore OpenShift will run there. Just it's not going to be supported. Nate scheduling gates contains a list of strings, and each string literal is perceived as a criteria that pod should be satisfied before considered schedulable. Seems like something Argo could leverage. Define a pod, but don't put load on the scheduler. Then once it identifies the gate is satisfied, remove it. Yeah, I could see that. Makes sense. Kind of, again, a third party or an external thing that's controlling when it gets scheduled. I still don't quite understand the, like, why make the scheduler aware of it at all if it's not ready to be scheduled? Because it's not, I don't think it's taking those resources into account when it's making other scheduling decisions. So why not just hold off on submitting the pod to be scheduled? I don't know.
So with what Nate's saying, I was trying to think of an example of something like this, especially with Argo, and a lot of like DevSecOps pipelines, like when you're starting the pipeline out and you're going from like that dev to staging to QE to whatever, it'll generate the application, but it's not a pod, it's an application resource, right? So it'll generate the application resource with nothing in it, and it'll just basically wait for stuff to get pushed to it, or it'll wait for the upstream Git repo to have something updated, so then that way the controller can trigger and do something. So that's I was kind of thinking along the same lines, Nate, but in the instances that I've used that before, or anything kind of similar, it would have been like on the application resource versus like a pod. So it's kind of, I'm sure there's somebody who put that in there. It's like, this is a concrete reason why we should do this, you know?
I'm very curious. So, Savion, how can I know if the cluster is using OpenShift SVN or SDN rather versus OVN Kubernetes? I could have told you this yesterday. OpenShift, no, OVN Kubernetes.
Yeah. So
Jonny,
from the CLI, if you do like an OC get networks/cluster OYAML inside of there, there's a network type. I just don't know how to do it through the UI yet. So like yep. There should be like a network resource. Yeah. Yeah.
operator? I think it's operator.
Yeah. And then Yeah, that one.
YAML.
And then there should be a network type in there that you see right there. Type up. OVN
There we go.
Kubernetes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just did the same thing that you did, just through the GUI. Thank you, Jonny.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for doing that, because I was trying to find it in my GUI, but I'm like, I'm no good at this.
Yeah, if you're not familiar, so because it's I've been GUI driven lately because I'm a manager and CLIs are hard. He says tongue in cheek. So all I did in the GUI here, administration custom resource definitions. So I just wanted to search by the name. So you said it was OC get network. So okay, it's going to be one of these network types, and then the group here is either config or operator. So basically, I guessed that it was going to be operator, and chose that custom resource definition. And then we go to the instances and we see cluster. So effectively, what we've done, looking at the screen, is the same thing as an OC get network .operator.openshift.io. And then the name of that object is cluster. And then if we click in here and look at the YAML, so -o YAML, and then that's what we're looking at. So type OVN Kubernetes. So that's how we figure it out. Can it wait for CRDs to exist? I don't know. I'm assuming you're referring back to the scheduling gates.
Yeah.
I would assume it can wait on anything because something else is controlling those gates and whether or not they exist. So to the point of like Argo being the one controlling those, like Argo could reasonably wait for something to exist and then go in and modify those.
That's actually a really good use case, the CRDs. So when you think about like, even if you do health checks on subscriptions, the way that all subscriptions are not created equally, meaning that like not all of the status fields are the same for every operator, right? Like there might be Red Hat certified operators that have like three things that are consistent across all of the statuses that they create. Communities might have one, and then just Jim Bob Billy Biscuits operator could have its own status stuff that it checks, right? So when you're trying to do a health check and you're trying to account for all that, it's very difficult because not all things are created equal. But if this actually worked on the CRD, you could say, hey, gate this thing until this deal exists. Don't do this next thing. So then that would actually help with like your linear operation, because then you could deploy something, and then this thing could actually probably get spun without deploying anything until the gate is met. I could see that working if that actually worked at the CRD level.
Interesting. And I realized while you were talking, I realized I skipped over a question from Alan. Why is OpenShift dropping libvirt/kvm? So it is, but it isn't. So it was a little known fact, at least in OKD, I think, that there was, if you did like an IPI install, you could use the libvirt/kvm option, and it would deploy to a local host and stand up like a separate network and all the resources inside of that host. At least I think that's what you're referring to, Alan. So OpenShift is still fully supported on RHEL KVM. So I can still go in and I have a bunch of physical RHEL hosts, and I can use RHEL KVM, Virtual Machine Manager or Cockpit or whatever, to create KVM virtual machines and install OpenShift to that. And that would be fully supported because RHEL is a certified hypervisor for RHEL. Interestingly, that same logic is how we also fully support OpenShift on OpenShift virtualization without hosted control planes. So if you want to deploy OpenShift to OpenShift virtualization, you would do a non-integrated or platform agnostic install. So that same, over here, where'd it go? Installing a cluster on any platform. So you would use that same installation process down here, just with those OpenShift virtualization VMs, and it's fully supported because it's RHEL, right? CoreOS, Red Hat Enterprise Linux CoreOS is RHEL. Just it's a flavor of RHEL that is tailored for Kubernetes and containers. Oh yeah, I will kick you. That's probably another good one. OpenShift SDN versus OVN Kubernetes. The namespaces or the projects. Possible to deploy OpenShift logging storage using NFS. I don't think so. I think the modern logging uses Loki, which uses object storage, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I was just looking up the article on this. So OpenShift logging, if you're using Elastic doesn't support NFS. It has to be block, I think is what it said.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Elastic does some weird things that above a certain transaction rate, it can cause corruption, if I remember correctly. Yeah, thank you for the link there. Could you use agent installer for that? Sorry, Alan. I'm sure that there's lag between you and us, so I'm not sure what agent based you're referring to. Maybe for installing to OpenShift on OpenShift virtualization, in which case, yes, you could use agent-based installer for that. You just create a platform none cluster when you're doing that deployment. Let's see. Where was I? Here we go. Other things inside of here. So user namespaces is tech preview. So this is an interesting one. So user namespaces is effectively decoupling the. So this is user namespaces at the kernel level. So there's kernel namespace, user namespace inside of Linux itself. So what this is referring to is inside of the container, it's using a user namespace to abstract away from the rest of the cluster. Where I think this is really cool is things like we've probably all invested a non-trivial amount of effort into, hey, I'm using this container image and the author is running everything as root inside of the container, right? OpenShift is well known for having non-root containers. Well, with user namespace support inside of the pods, now I can have that pod using root, but it's actually mapped into whatever user I want it to be at the platform level. And so it has no idea that it's not root, aside from it lacks root privileges at the host level, right? But has no idea that it's not root because it's being remapped or remapped dynamically by the platform. So I think that's a really cool one and a big security feature in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that helps with, and I might be thinking about it wrong, but it kind of helps with the migration from native Kubernetes to OpenShift, right? Because a lot of times, like that's a big challenge when you're coming from native Kube, especially if you just kind of get it working, and now you're trying to migrate it back, right? Like a lot of times you're not building in that security, framework into your deployment, and so at least that's been the experience that I've seen with people come from like that platform over back to OpenShift is like
Yeah.
OpenShift is really secure versus like any UID is in the spec of the Kubernetes app. So
Yeah, or even
nice.
if you're doing development on Ubuntu using Docker, and instead of Fedora or RHEL using Podman,
Mhm.
it's pretty common from my anecdotal experience of like I just Docker runs as root on the host. Anytime I'm doing Docker operations, it's running as root, so therefore it's kind of the default. And then all of a sudden it's time to roll out the application, and you got to go in and do a bunch of work in order to change it to be non-root. So local storage is only using object storage. I think so. Jonny, do you happen to know off the top of your head? I feel like I could look in the documentation, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna look in the docs, but I was actually just gonna reach out to the observability peeps too and ask them. But yeah, I'm looking it up too.
I don't, in my lab, I don't have object storage aside from the very tiny amount that we get through ODF. So I don't know. I've never deployed it. Can I finally stop yelling at people? I mean, maybe about that, but there's always something new. Let's see. Moving on. Spotlight features. So this is probably just a recap of most of the things. I'm not going to beleaguer or belabor any of the points that are here. Yeah, you can see 4 and 5 node clusters here. Node disruption policies. We talked about that in the Vert one as well. Most of these things I'm going to talk about in further on. Safe memory overcommit. This is the umbrella term that we use for enabling swap. Platform Plus, you can see policies code with Argo CD and Vex. Self-managed ODF on Rosa. Oh yeah, that's a big one. So for customers who are using Rosa hosted control planes, you can now deploy OpenShift Data Foundation inside of there. This one was a big one, I think. I think I've got a slide on that later. Multi-architecture hosted control planes. Lightspeed. So Lightspeed is tech preview currently. You can go in and you can find the operator inside of Operator Hub and deploy it inside of there. So Lightspeed to me is really interesting for a couple of different reasons. one, it is an interactive generative AI chat assistant. So what does that really mean? Andrew's, I'll say layman's definition is it's a great way to search the documentation in a more efficient manner. Because I can go in and I can ask it plain language questions. So things like, well, some of the questions that we've had here, right? How do I determine if I'm using OpenShift SDN or OVN Kubernetes inside of my cluster? Now I'm really curious to ask it that question, but I don't have it deployed on a cluster, I don't think. That would be really interesting. So it takes those, and tries to give you back an answer based on the documentation on that. So one thing to note is that it does not currently have, and I don't know what their roadmap looks like, so I can't help with this, but it doesn't have the ability to directly interact with your cluster. So you can't say like OpenShift Lightspeed, tell me which pods are in a crash loop backoff status. I mean, it doesn't have permissions to go in and query the cluster like that. But you can do things like essentially drag and drop in the UI, and this thing jumping around is kind of driving me crazy. In the UI, you can essentially drag and drop a YAML object as input to it. And you can basically say, like, how do I make this object do this thing, right? How do I add this capability, or how do I turn on this feature with this, pod definition or this CRD instance or whatever that happens to be. And it can help with that type of stuff. But you have to like give it that YAML. You can't say, for this object that's already in the cluster, how would I do this? Because it doesn't have that awareness. And we did have Eric Jacobs here on the stream a few episodes ago, maybe a dozen episodes ago, back right after Summit. So back in the June timeframe, he was on to talk about OpenShift Lightspeed. And it is progressing rather quickly, I will say. User namespaces, we already talked about this. Network isolation for namespaces, haven't talked about this. This is one that I'm kind of excited for. So I can't show this because I haven't deployed it and gotten hands-on yet. I just haven't had time. I've been too busy creating slideshows, he says, ironically, showing a slideshow. So effectively what this does is it allows us to create, I'm going to say, overlay networks that are dedicated to each namespace. I don't know if it is literally an overlay network or if it is just an isolated network namespace. So what is a network namespace, you may say, right? And how is this different, right? Network namespaces exist at the underlying Linux level, right? When you go in and define those things. And so it's still the same SDN, it's just using multiple network namespaces, one for each Kubernetes namespace, to provide isolation between each one of those resources. Importantly, this can also, and will also be able to do things like provide ingress and egress out of those networks. Because you may be thinking to yourself, don't we already have isolated overlay networks inside of OpenShift with OVN Kubernetes and L2 secondary networks? And the answer to that would be yes. However, you cannot ingress egress from those. So what I mean by that is, so let's reuse our diagram here. So let's say hypothetically, I have, this is an OVN secondary network using the L2 topology. There is this network will span all the nodes in the cluster and allow all of the pods or VMs or whatever is connected to it to communicate with each other. But this cannot go off of the cluster, and nothing outside of the cluster, nothing that's not directly attached to it, can reach that particular network. Whereas with network isolation and, you can see L3 pod network, it will allow that ingress egress traffic to exist. And I know that they also have on the roadmap the ability for that to be BGP enabled as well. So that way, effectively I get a / whatever from the network team and an AS number, and then my OpenShift cluster is participating effectively as a router. And it allocates so I got a /14, so it's going to allocate a /24 to namespace Jonny. And when Jonny creates pods or VMs in that namespace, they're accessible to the outside world because those routes are being published. So lots of really cool stuff that's happening there. You can see it's technology or tech preview with 4.17.0. And then one of the 4.17.z releases will release that as GA for pods. I want to say OpenShift Virtualization is targeting 4.18 for support on their side. Again, more information in the roadmap when that becomes available, and also roadmap things are always prone to change, so please don't hold me accountable for that.
I don't know if these are related, but this seems like a good use case for like oh my god, I cannot believe I just did that. I completely brain farted on what I was Scupper.
Welcome to
Right.
my world. Yeah, it happens when we get old, Johnny.
Man, that happened like mid thought. I was like, nope. But like we're setting up this isolated namespace, like say you have 2 clusters or something like that, right? And you do this on both sides, and you set up the scupper connections, and now you're really, I don't know. This seems like a good use case for that. I might be overthinking it. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting use cases here. I'm excited to see this one come to fruition, and I'm excited to get hands on with it and really see. There's just a lot of really cool possibilities that make this so much easier than, we previously we've been able to connect pods directly to the outside world through something like a Mac VLAN CNI plugin. This just makes it both more flexible, more powerful, and more easy. I don't know if it's easier, more easy, whatever.
more better.
To utilize. Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited for this one. I talked about this, or we talked about this during the What's New for Vert Admins as well. So node disruption policies. So node disruption policies, essentially, we as administrators can go in and say, hey, when this thing changes, so when I update the Etsy, blah, blah, blah file, don't take any action, or restart this service. As opposed to by default, for most operations that you're changing through machine config, the default action is reboot. And you can see here, right, reboot is the default action. So this just, as administrators, this means that we can hopefully prevent additional node reboots from happening and kind of minimize the amount of disruption that making configuration changes has. We talked about 4 and 5 node control planes, manage at scale. So hosted control planes, lots of information on here. So the couple of things that I wanted to call out here as being important: multi-architecture. So you can see here, like x86 control plane with Z data plane and power data plane. So I think that's kind of cool. If you're using, IBM Z, IBM Power compute resources, you don't necessarily want to have to dedicate resources to control plane things. You can instead now share those inside of that external cluster for hosted control planes. These are AWS, so I'm not going to talk about those as much, but you see you can have ARM control plane with x86 data plane as well as the inverse.
Yeah.
Particularly interesting because ARM control plane is less expensive
Yes.
from an AWS resources standpoint.
And it's matured. Like I did this initially when we first implemented our hosted control plane stuff, and it was like right after the multi-arc support kind of came out, and so it was just a little, I don't want to say buggy, but just not quite stable enough for us, right? So like we just ended up moving away from it, but it does work. It's very nice.
Yeah. Let's see, moving on, compliance operator, just additional profiles. I'm going to say, not that it's not exciting, but it's necessary. So important to know that there are additional profiles, PCI DSS 4, as well as the updated STIG. So not exciting, but not exciting either. Console. Oh, this is a good one. So lots of things that they've got going on here in the console, as always. The one that I wanted to call out is this one down here: simplified view of machine config files. Where's my cluster at? Oh, hey, look, I even had the new documentation page open, and I still, man, muscle memory is killing me. Do you know how long it took me to move from using double space between sentences to single space between sentences?
Yeah.
Like,
I get it.
Alex Handy yelled at me for like a year and a half. Like, why do you keep doing this?
I used to write, because Navy, right? You write all block letters.
Yeah.
Right? So I used to write like that all the time. Now I don't use any punctuation, or I don't capitalize anything at all. And so I've gone completely backwards.
What am I looking for here? So compute machine configs. So the change here in 4.17 is, let me choose any random machine config. And if I scroll down here, I now have this very handy configuration file readout thing.
Yeah.
Like I can just come in here and I can, here's the big 00 worker one. I can come down through here and I can see all the stuff that's going on inside of my machine config without having to go and, if we look at the YAML of this one, right, it's gross. It's like
Mhm.
hard to read and hard to tell what's going on. I got to like copy this out and then do a, remove the special characters or a base 64 decode. Well, now it's all here and I can read it. So this one to me is super helpful and super great when I want to add and edit, my machine configs. Like down here, I've got one for, where is it? SSH registries. Where'd it go? Here we go. So like swap. I wanted to configure swap on my nodes. I say that this one is pretty easy to read through. It's just a unit file. Well, now I'm curious as to why it doesn't show up on this one. That's weird.
Oh yeah. It's funny that you picked this one out of that list of RFEs because that's the same one that I also picked. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Great minds, Johnny. Great minds.
Yeah, I know. You can tell we've been through it, right? They've seen some stuff.
See, this one doesn't show up either. Well, now I'm curious as to why it doesn't show, why some of them show up and some of them don't. Generated registries. Like this one doesn't show up either. Well, now I have another question to ask the team. Like what's the logic for what shows up and what doesn't show up?
Yeah.
Let's see, other things in here. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't want to minimize. Like all of these things are really cool, and I'm happy to see all of these things progressing. I like this one down here, ability to create the project, customize the create project modal using dynamic plugins. So this way, if I have if I want to add in like provide an additional label or provide something when I create a new project. So projects, so create project. Basically, what it's saying is you can customize what this looks like. So you can add additional things inside of here. And then of course, with the dynamic plugin, there's some logic behind the scenes. So maybe I have an operator that is, or something that is going to, when a new project is created, it's going to also create a quota. And in this thing, I want to have an option that says, do I want a small, medium, or large quota or something like that. So I thought that was a really cool addition as well. Any of these you wanted to call out, Johnny? Git support for import from Git.
Yeah, the big one for me was the machine config. I was like, that is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think you wanted to talk about service mesh. No, I saw you making some comments about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna call it out that it's Service Mesh 3 is it's available. It's something that like I think Ortwin had come on and like they were they were talking about it coming out I think early this year, and so glad to see it finally came out. I've actually done some like a little bit of work with it. It's super easy to install and configure. Like if you think about like traditional Istio and stuff like that, well, traditional service mesh where you have to install like Kiali and Jaeger and Elastic and all these other things that go with it, like it's simplified that process. And then yeah, like on hosted control planes, Service Mesh 3 works out of the box, right? So like no issues with the cloud credential operator or anything like that. So yeah, always a plus in my book when it just works.
Yeah, what's the thing that they were calling the stateless? No, somebody asked about it on the stream. And
Oh yeah, something mesh. It was oh, I know what you're talking about. I'll find it, but it's something mesh.
yeah, I don't remember. It sounded cool, but I know very little about service mesh. Note that Gateway API is supposed to be a thing at some point as well. And I want to say that our initial, I don't know if it's still this way, ambient mesh. Yes, thank you.
Ambient mesh. Yes.
Gateway API, I think our initial thoughts were to use Istio's implementation of Gateway API or Istio to implement Gateway API. I don't know if that's still true or not. So I'm curious to see the roadmap when it comes up. But just know if you do see that, Gateway API using Istio is not the same thing as Istio service mesh. Same project name, just different aspects of it.
Yeah, there's a project called Red Hat Connectivity Link, and it uses Sail, so Service Mesh 3, and then it also uses like the Gateway API. But it's installed out of band. So but the way that Istio connects into it, it's
This is.
yes, the cell operators, part of the service mesh.
Yeah, sail operator.
Yeah, and then there's like a gateway API resource that you install for. This is all for connectivity links, so another network-based project.
I hear networking's a thing these days.
It is huge, and it's kind of cool. So,
GitOps 1.14. This one's all you.
Yeah, it's just like the flexibility in the dashboard and stuff like that is getting a lot better. There's a lot of stuff like multi-source. I think dropped a last release or one GA last release, and so that's getting more mature and stuff like that. So, yeah, I haven't actually I haven't dove into this too much yet. Like we are starting to use it, but I haven't actually gone through and looked at all the different
words, Johnny. Divin.
Yeah,
that's divin into it.
I haven't divified my Argo CD console stuffs yet. So
hey, I went to North Carolina public schools, right? I speak 2 languages: bad English and poor English.
Yes, and I'm from Texas and the South, so it's a double hit. But I will say this about rollouts: like rollouts is if you haven't used it, it is legit. It is so cool. If you've ever done canary testing in OpenShift, like way back, or even Kubernetes back in the day, and you're setting up the like and kind resources together side by side, and you're trying to canary test and do all this, it just kind of does it for you, and you can build in checks and like the logic that you can build in to make it really smart. Argo rollouts is such an awesome project. Like I've been on super high on rollouts for a long time. It's amazing.
That's an area where I just have not had the mental bandwidth to learn more about all the things that are happening there.
Yeah, dude, if you ever have an hour just to watch a video or something like that Gerald puts together on it, it's so good. It just reminds you of how hard it was yesterday and how easy it is today. You know what I mean? Like that's the beauty of it.
Faz not recommended to tweak some machine configs. That was my thought too. I didn't say it out loud, but as we were clicking through the things over here, of maybe they just, for certain things, they don't want to make it that obvious, like container runtime. Okay, well, this one's easy enough and displays in there. Control plane kubelet, like this one is in there. Okay, so I don't know. It seems like I would think kubelet config is kind of a sensitive one. Sensitive in this aspect of you can easily break things. Like this one, kernel arg scheduler stats, this is a custom one that I created. So why doesn't that one show up? I guess because maybe that's why. This is it's still a machine config, but it's a first level kernel arguments. Whereas if we come down here to worker swap, this one also doesn't show up. Config ignition systemd units. So that's a systemd unit that's there. So let's look at crony configuration. So this one does show up, and it's just listed as storage files. So maybe that's what it is. If it's a file, runtime, so containers, registries, Creo 000 default, policy JSON. So I wonder if that's what it is. If it's a storage files object, then it shows up, because you see none of these things down here show up either. Because all the ones that I was clicking on that weren't showing up, what was the other one that I was clicking on that wasn't showing up? Worker swap wasn't showing up because it's a systemd unit. So I off the top of my head, that's going to be the assumption, is it'll only show things that are basically a file that is being put onto the system.
And that makes sense, right? Because it's rendering the base64 backed out to clear text, so you can actually read it. Yeah, that makes sense.
So here's generated registries, which has no storage files entries, right? It's all other things inside of there. So that's my operating theory at the moment.
Yeah, and I will kick you. So ambient mesh, when we first got this question, we reached out to Ortwin about it, and the response was that ambient mesh initially from Service Mesh 3 won't be supported, but it's roadmapped to it had just dropped, I think, like the week before somebody had asked about it, and then so like the plan is for it to eventually be my gosh, it will eventually be supported in Service Mesh 3, but just like right now out of the gate, it's not yet.
Yeah. Although Service Mesh 3 isn't GA yet either. So
Correct. Yeah.
installer. Lots of, it's funny because I'm on the one of my additional side jobs is I'm part of the OpenShift product marketing core pod. So they have logical groupings of marketing and tech marketing folks that, how do we do various things, right? So one of the things with the core pod is we're responsible for the releases. And it's like every one of the OpenShift 4.something releases, it's, oh, this is a minor release. There's not a lot going on. That's not really true, y'all. Like there's a ton of stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
Like just because none of it is like big headlines or anything like that, it doesn't mean that we're not meaningfully progressing capabilities and stuff like that. And I feel like this is sort of the embodiment of that. Of like nothing here is like standalone by itself an individual feature that is like I'm going to stand up during a keynote and talk about it, but collectively there's a huge amount of progress that's happening here, right? IAM instance profiles for OpenShift. There's one over here, reserve capacity via machine API with Azure, which I think is a really cool one. Like there's just a lot of very helpful quality of life type things and just making things easier and more capable in small increments that just happens constantly. I'll also point out that the things that actually make it into these slides are kind of what collectively the group decides is like the top things or the things that we want to call attention to. There's actually hundreds, if not thousands, of additional things that happen that never make it in here. I always encourage folks, always go look at I'm going to try and use this. Always look at the release notes because the release notes will have the most thorough set of information about what's in the release. So you can see this is a very, very, very long page that includes all the stuff that's in here. So always take time to look at the release notes. I should have said this up front. Look at all the stuff that's in here. One of the ones that I always encourage folks to look at is the deprecated and removed features. So you can see bare metal event relay operator. I don't even know what that is. So it's been deprecated and it's now removed in 4.17. Samples operator is now gone, I believe. Or is it? Nope, still deprecated. So yeah, you can see just all the stuff in here that's deprecated and or removed, and keep up with what's going on there. So much earlier in the stream, somebody had asked about rel nodes and whether or not they're continue to be deprecated or have actually been removed. Well, somewhere in here, rel compute, no, rel node, rel worker. Anyways, somewhere in here, in this very, very long page, you will find the rel worker node stuff, and it's still listed as deprecated in there. Loki can only use object storage. Yep, S3 interface. Okay. Thanks, Jonny.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyways, so I called out the couple of things that I thought were interesting here. IAM instance profiles, the reserve capacity via machine API, but don't let that minimize any of the other things that are in here. It's important in many different ways. So, and for any of the engineering folks who are watching, that doesn't mean that I don't love and appreciate all of these things. Various installation highlights for the on-prem stuff. This one I thought was interesting from an installation highlight because it's not really an installation thing. It's a day 2 thing with adding nodes via ISO. We talked about that also during the What's New for Vert Admins. If you missed that one, so the experience here is once my cluster is deployed and I want to add a new node, I go in and I run this command and it spits out an ISO. and I boot the node to the ISO, and it does all the things, and it pops in, and I do the normal, OC, ADM, CSR approve, and it joins the cluster. So I don't have to jump through any hoops around like booting, take the generic RCOS ISO and boot the node, and then, edit the boot prompt and or boot into the CoreOS Live ISO and blah, blah, blah. I generate a single ISO. I can go out and I can join all the nodes. And that includes, I can create a single ISO that works with multiple nodes as well. So you can provide multiple MAC addresses, I believe. So that way it makes it easier. You'll also notice that you can include one or more nodes using a configuration file. So this configuration file, we click the documentation. That configuration file can include static IP information as well. So just like with the agent-based installer, right, I can go in and I can provide like, hey, this node, I want it to have IP address, 1234. I include that right in there. It boots up, it configures the IP, it joins the cluster. So really cool. I think I said during the What's New for Vert Admin stream in my opinion, this is really standardizing the way that we add nodes for clusters, right? My world is a little bit skewed because of bare metal and virtualization, which is where I've been spending a lot of my time. But effectively, it's one of those like, if I don't have BMC access, I can use this, right? It's predictable. It works whether I'm using DHCP or static IPs. It works whether I'm using, an integrated or a non-integrated cluster across multiple different platform types. If I'm using vSphere, if I'm using bare metal, if I'm using OpenStack, so on and so forth. It all works. If I'm using bare metal, and then I have the option of, where'd my cluster go? I can use the bare metal host operator. And yes, mine has a registration error because for whatever reason, it's refusing to get the power status. But effectively, I can go in and I can say, add a new host. I plug in the BMC information here, and it reaches out and it ingests the node. It'll show up in this list. I know. So it'll show up in this list. And then from here, I can just go in and scale up the associated machine set. And magically, I've added nodes to my cluster. And that works, by the way, whether you've done bare metal IPI or not. It doesn't have to be a platform bare metal cluster for this process to work. And then, of course, this is sort of this part is the extra step, because really scaling up the machine set is the same as with any other IPI cluster. So if it's an IPI cluster, actually, that's not true. It doesn't have to be IPI, but it is an integrated cluster with machine sets, because whether you use IPI or UPI, you have machine sets available to you. You can scale up the nodes in that way. So it's really, again, to summarize, standardizing the way that we add nodes. Either use the machine API methodology of adding a node to the cluster, or I boot the ISO and the node joins my cluster, and I just approve the CSR. See other things for the on-prem providers. vSphere, you see, also has support for the day 2 with the ISO. Multi-vCenter without shared storage tech preview. That one I think is going to be cool. A lot of folks have been asking for a long time of like, hey, I have 2 or 3 data centers or 2 or 3 vCenters across 2 or 3 different physical sites. I want to span my OpenShift cluster across them. So this is a way that you can continue to have VMware cloud provider integration, and therefore VMware CSI provider integration. So pods scheduled at node A get access to data stores at site A for their storage. At site B, they have theirs. One big happy cluster, all that. Let's see, Nutanix. You can see create VMs with GPUs, which is really cool for the AI related stuff. Lots of stuff on IBM Power and Z. See feature parity stuff like scheduler plugins. Multi-arch, we already talked about this. So the tuning operator, I think, is an interesting one that I need to dig more into. And then mixing clusters of various infrastructure types. OC Mirror, didn't we talked about this when we did the disconnected thing, right?
Yeah. And we on the GitHub sketch of the Galaxy, we actually had I think his name is Margo from the OC Mirror team on the stream talking about the changes that they're making. I'll find the link and share it. But yeah, if you haven't looked at it yet, it's worth your time. It's awesome. Like the way it works, the flexibility. and the idempotency of it. Like when you run it, you can run it again, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I know they've been doing a lot of work on disconnected. Hosted control planes on disconnected also got a lot of improvements as well. Networking, big one I wanted to call out here. The OpenShift SDN is deprecated, so you can see the details here. No longer available in 4.17. No new installs 4.15 and later. Upgrades, you can upgrade to 4.16. So lots of stuff happening there. Please be aware, if you are currently using OpenShift SDN, please be considering that migration as you move forwards. However, note that 4.14 and 4.16 are both EOS releases. So 4.16 would have, if you can upgrade to 4.16, you would have 3 years, potentially up to 3 years of support for that. So that means that 4.16 was released back in June, I think. So you'd have support out through June of 2027 if you need to stay on OpenShift SDN for that long. Network observability operator. So this one, I really like this operator, and the longer it has existed, you see we're on 1.7, the more I like it. So in my cluster here, I just went in and I deployed it earlier today. Networking, nope, not networking, observe network traffic. Like with this, I can come in and, here we'll just get rid of all of the filters so it shows me everything. Like I can see all of the traffic that's happening in my cluster. I didn't even deploy the Loki option. So I don't have object storage, so I didn't deploy Loki, so I can't see the traffic flows, but I can see like traffic that's happening inside of my cluster, where it's going inside of here. I can click the topology and I can get a view of all the different things as I zoom in.
I love this so much.
Yeah, so like if I look at where'd it go? It's infrastructure. No. Here's one of these where it'll show me only node traffic. And now I don't remember how I got it. Anyways, I'll figure that one out again. But yeah, here it is. There, so I can see like node to node traffic as an administrator. So I can see, here's how the nodes are communicating. Here's how much traffic is going between them. I can dig down and see different details here. Here's metrics over time. I literally, all I did was go in and deploy the operator. Like deploying this could not be easier. Of going in and the network observability operator, once it's deployed, create a flow collector. This flow collector, I configured nothing on it. I just clicked create, and I have access to all of this data. And as I said a moment ago, if you were to deploy or have Loki available where it can or send data over to Loki and keep it there, then it's even more powerful in the stuff that it can show you. So I really like this one. So look at the namespace level. I can see all of the different namespaces. So if I look at just the applications I want, so here's a bunch of different, just the non-default or the non-core namespaces. Here's the stuff that's going on inside of there and the different communication that's happening. It's just really cool to me. I love this operator. Does the network observability operator show network policies? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I usually, whenever I want to look at that stuff, I usually rely on ACS. I say that acknowledging that not everybody has ACS. ACS does a gorgeous job of helping with this data visualization for the network flows, but also being able to create network policies on demand. Could not get network observability operator to work without Loki. So one thing, and I made this mistake myself, I will kick you. If we come back over here to network observability, when you go to create the flow collector, make sure, I said I didn't change anything. I did change one thing. You have to make sure to turn this off. So if you don't have Loki available, make sure to turn off that, set the Loki enable to false, and then it'll deploy and be able to use it. or excuse me, it'll deploy and be able to work without Loki. So I was not speaking truthfully when I said I didn't modify anything a moment ago.
How could you?
I know. Yeah, I don't. That's an interesting question about network policies. I'd be curious to know that myself, but at the same time, I can't help but wonder how the ACS folks would feel about that. Yeah, here's all the infrastructure stuff, like API server. Like, show me what API server is doing and all that other stuff. We'd probably have to deploy it with Loki to get the traffic flows to determine
Mhm.
whether or not like network policy can be seen and or managed from here. So I don't know. I'm curious about that one. Now I feel like I need to go and deploy Loki and check it out. What else do we got? Operator framework. Yeah, manage deprecated operators. So I don't know if you can see this. It's a little hard to see, but basically it gives you deprecation warnings for any operators that you have deployed inside of there, which I think is really cool. Storage, lots of stuff happening with storage as always.
Hey, real quick, Andrew, before if you just go back 2 slides to the operator stuff. I just wanted to call it out, like OLM v1 is tech preview right now, and it's going to fundamentally change the way, like, so if you think about how we install an operator today, we install a subscription, an operator group if it needs it, and then we create the operand. It's going to extensions, I think is what they're going to call them instead of operators, right?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah, so it's like cluster extensions or API extensions. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but just something to keep in mind. Something that you want to read up on is that, like, when VLM or when OLM v1 comes out, it's going to be a pretty big change. But I think it's going to help a lot with like right now when you install an operator, it will install a lot of cruft, and if you were to uninstall that operator, it doesn't necessarily uninstall all of the things that it puts on, and so that can cause issues at some point, like especially if you're using GitOps controller to deploy operators where it's checking for certain things. So like I think OLM v1 is going to be it's going to be a big thing. It's going to be a big change, but it's going to be a nice update when we get there.
Cluster extension.
Cluster extensions. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's the documentation on it. But I'm also a glutton for punishment and a creature of habit, and I don't use the Red Hat docs.
For shame.
I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop myself.
What was it? One of the project. I think it was hosted control planes, because the project for hosted control planes is Hypershift, which is way more fun to say than hosted control planes. So at one point it was like the curse jar where you got to put $1 in the jar every time you call it the project name instead of the feature name.
And I'm probably like one of the worst ones. Like I'd probably be broke if I'd like actually contribute to that jar because I'm terrible about it.
I'm. It depends for me. It's like the two spaces between sentences thing. Eventually I'll get there. It took me about 1.5 years to with the switch to RHEL 8 to stop using yum and switch to using DNF.
Yeah.
And it was one of those like, oh, I've officially made it into RHEL 8 land when my default became DNF instead of.
Yeah. That was like yum and DNF, netstat and SS, and then what was the other one? Like IP tables and firewall D.
Yep.
I was like, what is happening to me? Like,
yep.
I can't learn.
And I would forcefully remove the alias for yum to DNF to try and help myself learn the new one.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
That's funny because you, right? Like you well enough to know that like I won't change.
Yeah. But that's all I got for today. Looking inside of 4.17 cluster on the surface, not a lot has changed. It's still OpenShift. It's still all of the great OpenShift things that you've come to know and love and expect. Just more better and continuing progress. Virtualization. I think I talked about this, or I know I talked about this during the What's New for Virt, but virtualization added a new console here. If anybody missed that, so now there's a dedicated virtualization console that shows all the interesting stuff there.
Yeah, and Peter and those and Peter and Joy from the UI team, or I'm sorry, not UI team, from the user experience team.
Yeah.
They were on last week and they were talking about this. Like they're doing the Lord's work with this stuff, man. Like it's really good.
Yeah. I did a presentation for the Red Hat champions last week, like literally at the same time as the stream, which was why I wasn't here. And so I was referencing the stream in that presentation, and like, yeah, you should go listen to Jonny and check out what they're talking about right now.
That's awesome.
So, all right. I don't have anything else with regard to this. If anybody has any questions, if you have any, anybody who is at the live stream for 4.17, what's new with 4.17, please don't hesitate to ask those questions while you're here. If you go back and watch it later and anything comes to mind, don't hesitate to reach out to Jonny or I. Again, we love to hear from y'all. If you have any questions that come up at any point in time, please don't hesitate to reach out. You see our email addresses here on screen, or if you're not watching the screen, it's Sully, SULLY at redhat.com, or Jonny, JONNY at redhat.com. So don't hesitate to reach out with that regard at any point in time. Jonny loves to get email, especially at crazy hours of the night.
It's true.
I set my phone to do not disturb, so it's fine.
Yeah, I try, but sometimes I'm just glutton for punishment.
Yeah. With that, for anybody who has any questions, please go ahead and get those into chat. I'm trying to think. Sorry, there's a weird noise sounding outside, and I'm trying to remember if today's one of the. So I live close to a nuclear power plant, and so periodically they do siren tests because it's like a 10-mile radius, right? And so periodically they do siren tests, and twice a year they're the full volume 3-minute long tests, which are
alarming.
Yeah, if you're not prepared for it, it's interesting. But no, that one was, I'm pretty sure that was like a work truck backing up or something. But yeah, every time I hear those, especially this time of year, like spring and fall, when we have the windows open, enjoying the nice weather and all that other stuff, and then suddenly you hear this like loud siren go off, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, spooky.
Is the external traffic policy local? Working on this version. Jamal, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, for sure. Alarm sounds start taking iodine pills. I mean, figure if I live within a 10-mile radius of the power plant, there's no amount of iodine that's going to help. Like if it goes, 3 Mile Island on us or something. So funny story, years and years ago, I used to work on a Department of Energy site. And, it was lots of, nuclear material from all of the testing, and it was a science site and all that other stuff. And it was one of those, they're like, this is one of those places where like, we can tell when you come to lunch with a banana because bananas are radioactive. And like the detectors around the site are sensitive enough to pick up the radiation from like bananas. And so like they'll know immediately if there's any kind of leak or anything like that that's going on. Any insights on the OpenShift market share compared to other competitors? I don't have anything there. Our marketing folks probably have something. I honestly don't pay attention. I know, there's the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the Forrester Wave, and all that other stuff. That's we consistently ranked in the leaders stuff and all that. I want to say market share. I don't even want to speculate at this point, aside from saying that OpenShift is the market leader. If you'll reach out to me, Sully at redhat.com, I can find the publicly shareable slides that we have on that stuff. It's like, I don't remember what it is. So there's some like number. I don't remember what the number is of like when people ask how many customers does OpenShift have, and it's like more than X number of thousand customers, and I can never remember what it is because I never do those presentations. Can the next one be more virtual machine networking, please? I don't know what our next topic is, Jonny. Do we have the list somewhere? But
yeah. So next week.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I don't know what our next topic is, but I'm always happy to talk about virtual machine stuff, virtual machine networking, storage, etc. Happy to talk about that. So we can try and put something together.
Yeah, I was gonna say next week we're not doing a stream because of KubeCon. Week after is the 20th, and we have the ACM team coming out to talk about the global hub. And then the next week is Thanksgiving, so we can either do a stream that day, that Wednesday before the holiday,
I'll be on
or the
PTO.
next one. Okay, so then it would be like 12/4, which I think Tigera is going to be here.
Okay.
They haven't confirmed though, so
Okay.
if 12/4 could be a possibility if we don't hear back from them.
Yeah. I did a webinar with the Tigera folks. It was a lot of fun, showcasing.
I'll reach out to that guy.
Speaking of virtual machine networking, they were showcasing using Calico Enterprise with OpenShift virtualization and applying all of the features and capabilities of Calico with VMs. So I mentioned before, like BGP and network policy and all of that stuff. With Calico, it works with virtual machines as well. So lots of cool stuff there. Loads of questions on VLAN separating OpenShift virtual machines away from cluster network. Yeah, we can definitely cover that stuff. So there is, I will also point you to the reference implementation. See if I can remember this off the top of my head. Guide. So that link goes over to the reference implementation guide. So the networking example that's in there uses, if I remember correctly, and let me open this link. So red.ht vert ref guide. So if we look at this and we come down here, sorry for all the scrolling in your face. So way down here we have, so here's a node network configuration policy that explains like, here's how to create a bond of two network adapters using LACP. So you see here it's called bond 1. And then down below, there is a node network configuration policy that then creates an OVS bridge, so an OVS bridge on top of the bond. And then it creates OVN bridge maps for each one of the VLANs. So on OVS BR1, which is the OVS BR1 up here, we create a bridge mapping for VLAN 2024. And then down here is the network attachment definition that maps that bridge map over to a VLAN tag. So this is the currently recommended method of doing virtual machine connectivity to VLANs, is using OVS. The reason for OVS is because one, it's high performance, but two, it is also full featured. And by full featured here, I mean you can use network policy, or excuse me, multi-network policy to apply rules against it. So at the cluster level and at the namespace level, I can define multi-network policies that say VMA is only allowed to communicate with VMB on ports 3306, and it cannot communicate with anything else, for example. So that's the currently, I just realized that I've been going through and talking about all of this and my screen is not shared. Can't believe you didn't tell me that, Jonny. Fired.
Oh, my bad. I was actually looking up the answers of Michael's question, so my bad.
Yeah, all good. All good. So here is the reference guide. You see down here on page 18, this is just that. So here's a node network configuration policy. Here's what I was referring to of creating the bond, LACP bond with the two adapters. And then down here on pages 19 and 20, node network configuration policy for creating the OVS bridge. So OVS bridge here. Importantly, this allow extra patch ports is important because what will happen is as you're connecting VMs onto that OVS, it creates patch ports, right? It's patching the VM port into the bridge, and those show up if you inspect the OVS. If you don't have that setting present, then NMState will look at it and go, what are these doing here? And remove them. And that, of course, disconnects the VM, and that's bad. So having that setting there is important. And then down here is our network attachment definition. So note that all of this is done in YAML because it was the most effective way for them to, when we created this, to communicate it in here. But you can do all of this over in the GUI as well. So if I come down here to network configuration policy, I can create, a open vSwitch bridge, which is OVS. So we'll call this OVS-BR0. What ports do I want to use? Bond 1. We don't need STP. If I want to add additional, so these bridge maps are what we use for our VLANs. So it'd be like VLAN-2024. OVS bridge is this current bridge, which remember we called OVS-BR0. OVS-BR0. I'm not going to create this because it won't actually work because there is no bond 1. But this is how I would create it through the GUI. And then once my NNCP is configured, I can check its status using like we see here. We'll be able to see the status of that down here. There are also NNCEs per node. And then we would create the node network attachment definitions. So I can create a network attachment def. So we want an Ovian Kubernetes secondary local net network is what we want. So if we look over here at this thing, so this is a topology local net. So counterintuitively, the local net topology is basically saying connect this to a local network device, not a local network device. So I would create we'll give this one a name. So nad-VLAN 2024. Secondary network or bridge map is going to be that VLAN-2024. And our VLAN is 2024. So remember, the bridge map is that thing that I created at the bottom of the node network configuration policy. That being said, this is just one brief example. There's tons and tons of different ways you can configure networking for VMs. What I'm skipping over here is configuring OpenShift virtualization to attach VMs to the same interface that OVN Kubernetes is using, which gets confusing. So we can definitely walk through all of those and look at different scenarios and all that. Can you set up management cluster for using vSphere and using HyperShift? Set up host control plane where worker nodes are in AWS.
Technically feasible, not tested.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's possible but not supported, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah, like in the HyperShift docs, like in the actual upstream docs, like they talk about that exact configuration. But in like the hosted control plane support FAQ, it's really like it's available. It shouldn't not work.
Yeah.
But it's not supported. And Michael, most likely what's going on with the S3 thing is you probably need that bucket created in the default project. I think it's like kube default or kube public or something like that. I can't remember. It should be the error that you saw because I've most likely run into it, and I can at least kind of like walk through my config with you.
Yeah.
But it should technically work, but just it's one of those things where you're on your own from a support perspective. But the control plane, the hosted control plane, and the node pools have to be the same platform. So your management cluster can be different, but when you create the hosted control plane, that hosted control plane and its node pools have to be on the same platform. They can't. That part can't be intermixed.
Yeah. How does the bond tie itself to a specific node? So in the GUI, you would want to apply a selector. So I don't know. Here, explore node list. Oh, where are you taking me? So if I come here and details, one of these labels is going to be the host name. But effectively, I would just provide a selector that is the host name. So many labels. Anyways, basically you provide a node selector is all. So add a label, so host name, I'm just making this up, I don't know what it actually is, node 8, right? Yes, no nodes are found because that key value doesn't actually exist, but that's how you would apply it to, for example, a specific node, which is important if you're doing things like, yes, I want to create, a bond, and with that bond, I want to give it, an IP address, for example, if I want to do static IP assignment. All right. Anything else, Jonny?
No, dude, you did awesome. This is thorough as hell.
I mean, you say that, and yet I know I'm like, again, there's the whole, we call it a whole company readiness document that has like everything that changed in it, which is just this, it's a summarized version of the release notes. So I feel like it wasn't that exhaustive. We missed a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so that's all I got. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all the chat, all the questions. If you have anything else, anything comes up, if anything's not making sense or you want clarification, details, etc., please don't hesitate to reach out. Sully at redhat.com, Jonny at redhat.com. We love hearing from y'all. With that, we will be back next week. Next week, we will be talking about ACM
Week after.
Global. Week after, yes, that's right. KubeCon is next week. So we will be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was just gonna tell Michael, hit me up. I have some automation for you it'll create the bucket. It sets up the public policy and stuff like that. Because yeah, it has to be a public. The bucket has to be public for the OIDC connector. So yeah, if you hit me up, I'll share everything I have with you.
Oh, that's right. I remember going through that back when
Yeah.
hosted control planes was first really, like, yeah, it has to be a public bucket, which is gross.
It got me. It got me.
Yeah.
Like because everything will work or it'll deploy, and then when you try and provision a cluster, it's just like, no.
Yeah, because it doesn't, like, at the time of provisioning, at whatever stage it needs to get that information, it doesn't have an ability to get the credentials for it to be an authenticated bucket, so it has to be a public bucket. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
So okay.
I've seen things, man. I've seen things.
I know. All right, y'all. Thanks a bunch. Greatly appreciate everybody coming out. Congrats again to rHope9 for being a OpenShift superhero. Really, really, really proud of and happy for all of that. So thank you, and congratulations. And with that, Jonny, last words.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for all the chat. rHope9, you're awesome. Thank you very much. And to audience, we seriously can't do this, wouldn't do this without you. So thank you very much.
Yep. See y'all in 2 weeks.
See you.